A Christmas Carol is just around the corner. This is how you are going to smash it. We have to think about Dickens' purpose because that automatically gets you grades 7 and above. First, this is a political novel. I know it doesn't sound like it, does it? But Dickens wanted to write a political pamphlet about the exploitation of children in Victorian society, but he didn't have the time. He needed to write a bestseller. He started writing this in November, and it had to be published at Christmas in order for people to buy it at Christmas time. So he splurged it super quickly. It is a Christmas story. At the back of his mind, it needed to be political, and that is why we have ignorance and want. On this side of the board, I'm going to show you the top quotes. They are chosen because they help you write about Dickens' purposes. That's how you know they're the top quotes. Ignorance and want, you will remember, are two ghostly little children that exist inside the robes of the Ghost of Christmas Present. They are not real children. They are symbols. What do they symbolise? Well, want is poverty. And Dickens is saying we will create a better future when we get rid of childhood poverty. That's want. But also, we need to get rid of childhood ignorance. It is this boy that Dickens says, beware, beware this boy, says the Ghost of Christmas Present, for on his brow I see that which is written, doom. Doom, of course, is disaster for society. It's going to be crime. It's going to be violence. It could be revolution. So, Dickens' warning is, unless we become less like Scrooge at the beginning and more like Scrooge at the end, society will fracture. There'll be crime, there'll be violence, there might be revolution. We need to change society just like I have changed Scrooge. So then we get to anti-poor law. As you will know, Malthus introduced the idea that the poor were surplus. Why were they surplus? Because they consumed lots of things, lots of goods, lots of food, but they didn't earn wages to give back to society, and therefore the poor needed to be controlled. So the poor laws went through Parliament, and they controlled the poor by putting them in workhouses where they lived in terrible conditions. They were fed very little food, and they were essentially forced labour. Because they were forced labour, they couldn't go out and get their own jobs, raise their income and get out of poverty. So the poor laws kept people poor, kept people unhealthy, and led to their early deaths. And that links us, of course, to are there no workhouses, says Scrooge when he's asked to contribute to the charity men, and they had better die and decrease the surplus population. That economic language from Malthus. So obviously, Dickens is attacking not just that view in politics, but also the reader, because the reader shares those views. The reader isn't opposing the poor laws. So now we can see how this is actually a political novel underneath the surface of the hilarious and entertaining Christmas ghost story. Sophisticated, and when you're sophisticated, grade 7 and above is easy. Then we have pro-wages. Why is Dickens suggesting that society needs to raise the amount of money they pay to the people they employ? Well, for that you need to know a little bit about what Victorian society was like. So take me, a middle-class man. I would not do my own cooking. I would employ a cook. I certainly wouldn't do any of my own cleaning, and neither would my wife. We would employ a charlady or a maid. Would we stick our clothes in the washing machine? No, such things did not exist. We would employ a laundry woman. So one middle-class person would actually end up employing several people, and those people needed to be paid, and the middle classes paid them too little. How do we know? Because of Bob Cratchit. When we get to the end of the novel and Scrooge becomes a second father to Tiny Tim, one of the things he does is raise Bob's wages. Dickens' point isn't that Scrooge was paying too little to Bob because he was a miser. No, Bob has stayed with Scrooge all the way through. Why is that? Because Scrooge is paying the going rate, 15 shillings. That is historically the going rate for that kind of work. Dickens' point is, I create this appalling miser, and he is just like society because he pays the same wage. Society is like Scrooge, and we want to change society to become like Scrooge the benefactor at the end of the novel. Again, a political message. Then we have the idea of Christian redemption. Why wouldn't you write about Christianity? It's Christmas time. Christ is there to teach us the moral lesson of how we should live our lives through redemption. That is why Scrooge starts as such a villain and turns into such a hero who gives a fortune to the charity men. Because Dickens is saying, look at society. We've got the poor laws, how awful we are. What if we redeemed society by treating the poor better? How would we do that? Well, the quote about becoming a second father to Tiny Tim is symbolic. We, the reader, need to become fathers to the poor. We have to treat them as our own children. It takes us back, of course, again to ignorance and want. If we treat the poor like our own children, they will be raised up. A key part of that is educating them, and that's why ignorance is the thing that needs to be changed. Then we have this idea I've introduced to you already, that poverty will lead to crime and violence. We've covered that with ignorance and want, but there is also a personal journey for Dickens. Dickens takes the Cratchits and he puts them in Camden Town, small part of London, and he puts them in a house in Camden Town that Dickens himself grew up in and was torn out of when his father and then the whole family was sent to debtor's prison. And Dickens, at 12 years old, was ripped out of school. He could have become ignorance. And he was forced to work, to raise enough money, living on his own in a bedsit somewhere else, in this appalling tanning factory, terrible conditions, working long and dangerous hours until he could earn enough to help his family get out of poverty and get out of debtor's prison. You can see how this is a personal journey for Dickens, and that is why he is so passionate, and probably a reason why he was able to write this novel at such speed. The fear of poverty never left him, and A Christmas Carol was the bestseller that lifted him back onto his financial feet. Fear of poverty, remember, is what drove Scrooge. He had the new golden idol because he feared being poor. That's why he became a miser. And the generosity he needs is the generosity that Dickens has grown through himself and wants society to have for the poor. Well, that is grade 9 already. You've got all the quotes you need. Let's see which ones I haven't introduced you to yet. He begins as a covetous old sinner. Christian language, which takes us back to the idea of Christian redemption. Dickens' message is, if you are truly a Christian, then you must help the meek. It's what Jesus would have done. We've covered, are there no workhouses? Tell me if Tiny Tim will live. This happens at stave 3, and it is the pivotal moment in the novel. It's right in the middle because there are 5 staves. Stave 3, Scrooge sees this terrible Christmas that the Cratchits are having, and yet they rejoice in each other's company, even though Tiny Tim obviously looks frail and weak and underfed. This is the moment that Scrooge begins to change his mind. Not when he sees his own grave and the ghost of Christmas yet to come goes ooh and scares the hell out of him. No, that is just there for the drama, for the excitement. But the psychological moment when he starts to realise what a criminal he is in his attitude to Bob Cratchit, that is in stave 3. That is why the novel ends with Tiny Tim and God bless us everyone. Christian redemption. That is all the quotes. What is left? Well, your exam tactics. What are you going to do with all this expert knowledge? You are going to spend half of your time writing about Christmas Carol, roughly 52 minutes. You are going to take the key words out of the question, whether it's poverty, whether it's the ghosts, whether it's fear, whether it's the Christmas spirit, and you're going to write them on the first 4 pages of your answer booklet. Why would you do that? To make sure you remember to use those words in every paragraph you write. That will show you're always answering the question rather than just blurting out everything you know about the novel. Use the word society. I have never seen an essay with society used 3 times that didn't get a grade 7. I'm sure you could. It would be unlikely because when you write about society, you're always writing about Dickens' ideas, and that's where grades 7 to 9 are. Then I want you to write a thesis statement. What does that mean? It means you're going to pick 3 of Dickens' ideas which are relevant to the question. Which ideas? Any of those. You know how to do it now, because all those quotes link to all those ideas. You can smash it. What do you do about the extract? The exam paper says starting with the extract. So if you are getting success by starting with the extract, that is what you're going to do. If that is not giving you the grades that you want, then I'm going to give you a new way to start with the extract. So you pick 1 quote from the extract that answers the question, and then you're going to pick something from the beginning of the novel and something from the end that will show the journey, show the change in Scrooge, or that theme. With A Christmas Carol, it is actually the easiest text to do it with because that is always the beginning, and so is this, his attitude to the poor, and then the ending, these 2 are always how everything changes. That's how I know you will always be able to write about those quotes, and they're relevant to every purpose, so they must be relevant to every question. So you get a quote from the extract, 1 from the beginning, 1 from the end, and then you move back to the extract, another quote, 1 from the beginning, 1 from the end, and you have shown the examiner that you have dealt with the whole text. All your AO1 marks come juicily towards you and you can score super highly. Where will you get your context marks? They were all in my explanations of Dickens' purpose. And so context just gets weaved in to your explanation about why Dickens is including these quotes and these ideas. It's easy, isn't it? Then we have the alternative. You could decide to say, well, if I'm going to write about the beginning and show the journey towards the end, I might just write about the beginning of the novel and follow the character or follow the theme right through. And I'll stick the extract in where it happens chronologically. Are you allowed to do that? Yes. The mark scheme says yes. The examiners say yes. Your teachers might have said, no, start with the extract. Fine. You can start with the extract, but also, if you have been experimenting with writing chronologically, you have full trust in my 32 years of teaching and reading hundreds of exam answers. I promise you, you can write chronologically. Don't change something that is working, and don't make a change if it makes you feel nervous. But otherwise, change away. Grade 9 essays average 13 quotes. Grade 7 essays average 10. Where are you going to find them? Here they are. And then you've got some from the extract. My mantras. Why are these important? These are catchphrases which will lead you to getting top marks. So these are things that I would actually write on my exam paper or kind of say to myself as I'm going into the exam. Go on the B of bang. This is the sprinter, the bang of the starter pistol. You don't wait for the sound of the whole bang to reach you because everyone else is going as soon as they hear the beginning, the B of bang. Start writing as quickly as you can. Why is that important? Because writing is thinking. As soon as you start writing, your brain is automatically jumping to new ideas. That is so powerful because you won't be stuck for ideas. You might write an idea that's rubbish, but it will introduce you to a new idea, which you will then write about, which will introduce you to another idea, which you will then write about. And then, and only then, you can go back and cross out the one that was rubbish. If you write a rubbish idea and crossing out, you will stop. You will freeze. Do not cross anything out until you have written the next good idea. Writing is thinking. Then, points make prizes. The more you write, the higher your grade. Guess what? Grade 5, 500 words. A grade 6, 600 words. You can see where I'm going. A grade 9, 900 words. That is a pattern we see again and again and again in the exam. What sort of words? Well, it is actually explanations, the number of explanations that you write. What is an explanation? It's anything which could start with the words, this suggests, or words like this suggests, this implies, this signifies, this indicates, this reveals, or you could just write, this suggests 30 times. What would you be explaining? The author's ideas, the effects of the quotes, the context, in the ideas, in the quotes. Really, really simple. And how do I get there? Points make prizes. This suggests. Now, what about methods? What about subject terminology? Well, methods are anything that the writer does. Anything at all. Characterises, describes, contrasts. Anything the writer does is a method. You will know it's a method because you can write this emphasises after it. So this blah blah blah, this contrast emphasises, this description emphasises, this characterisation emphasises, ending in this way emphasises, beginning in this way emphasises. Those are things the author is doing, those are your methods. They will also be most of your subject terminology. Now, language features are also subject terminology, but they are only a part of subject terminology. So by all means, when you see a quote and you spot a language feature, mention it and you will score the terminology mark. But you only score the mark for methods when you link it to the meaning, which is why emphasises is so important. The word emphasises will be followed by whatever you think the meaning is. Therefore, getting grade 7 and above is easy. What's going to stop you getting the grade? You probably just won't write enough. But you're going to remember, writing is thinking. Go on the B of bang. See you on the other side.